Welcome to the Lore Life podcast, where we seek to navigate our days with a little less stress and ideally a lot more fulfillment. We are checking in over a coffee today to talk about isolation, our new normal, and calculating risk. I'm Mike Anderson.
And I'm Darlene Tonelli.
Hello, Darlene.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. It's nice to hear the theme music.
It's nice to hear your kidlets in the background, the children. It's something I think that everyone can relate to, is the kids in the background issue, whether it's video or audio or I don't know if there's any other form, but otherwise.
Whatever the form, my kids are all over it. We were on a call earlier this week that I would put in the camp of calls that pre-pandemic I would have been highly professional, very concerned about making sure that there were no distractions. And yeah, I mean, both my kids came in during that particular call, and it was fine. It actually lightened the room up a little bit. And I just kind of rolled with it. I mean, what are the options, really? Let's discuss. What are the options when your children go into the Zoom call? Gone are the days. Remember that guy who was on live television and his wife came in chasing the kid, and it was just like, oh my God, can you believe a kid was on live TV? Went viral. Like, that is now totally hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
I think it probably has happened 10 times since the pandemic, that exact situation. What are you supposed to do, though, other than laugh? I mean, that's really what you do.
I think it has to be met with good humor, because I've seen in instances, even with some of the television shows that are happening online now, like the late night shows and stuff, if you kind of see a glimmer of annoyance from the adult in the video, I don't know. I think it looks bad on them. You just have you have to appreciate what's going on. You have no control. You love the kids. Let's make the most of it,
Yeah, and they find it so fascinating.
For a second, this is the thing. And what I was going to say was, I heard of one dad whose rule is, if you interrupt my video conference meeting, you have to sit through the whole thing.
Oh my God.
Which he said was an amazing deterrent, because his daughter came in. He's like, okay, you're here now. And she sat on his lap for a 45-minute meeting about, for her, like, nothing.
Just
and she then went and told her brothers and sisters, like, don't go in there. You have to, you'll be stuck listening to this whole awful meeting forever. Imagine being like 5 and listening to any of our meetings. It would be the worst.
Well, this is what it's kind of occurring to me. When my dad went to work when I was a small kid, the age that my kids are, it was interesting because you didn't really know what they did there, right? Like, you didn't have any sense what happened at Dad's office. Sometimes he would come home with fun things. Sometimes he would come home with, there would be a party and you would meet people at the party for the office, and Santa would come. Like, these are my early memories of my dad's office. And, going into his office, looking at stuff in his office, but not really being aware of what his work was. And I think what's interesting with these kids of mine now, they think my daughter always says, Mom, go work on your computer. Like, she has no idea normally what I do. But then since the pandemic, there are all these people in there, and it seems that Mom is talking to people in there, right? So I think that it will be very interesting to think about what this generation of kids wants to do with their lives now that they have a clear picture of what adulting involves. I don't know. Have your kids said any? Well, your daughter, obviously, because your son's a bit young to comment.
Yeah, he's 1 now, so he has no idea. He still has no idea what's going on. I would say that my daughter has no clue what I do either, despite my trying to tell her from time to time. It would have been way easier if I, could take her to an office, which we don't have, and at least she could see files and computers and a setup with I suppose if it was the old school, like, assistants and clerks and a copy room, and that all speaks to, okay, there's something going on in this place. But just looking at me sitting in front of my computer, I think it'd be very hard to tell what the heck I'm up to. So who knows what she thinks? I don't know. I have no idea. On a fun note, speaking of sitting in front of a computer, I've started, my daughter and I have started her own, I guess it's a podcast. We're calling it a radio show. but she, because I have the microphone here and she's become interested in it, so she just like sits and talks for 5 minutes into it, and I cut it into like a 2 minute episode and send it to the family, and it's really fun. So maybe she thinks that I do that. I don't know.
Well, you do that.
I guess I do that.
I
It still
mean,
feels like quite a side thing. Yeah, I guess I
I
do
mean,
do that.
it is
It's
a
true.
side thing, but you are a podcaster. We spend a good chunk of our time podcasting at this point.
I suppose,
Not
yeah.
It's
Mhm.
good, amazing.
Okay, so how is your isolation new existence going since we last chatted?
I've come to a new phase in the pandemic that is almost like I'm happy with how things are. I don't know that anyone else is probably feeling this, and I'm not feeling it because every day is so great and, there are no stresses and there are no difficulties. Obviously, there are massive challenges of the pandemic, but the thing I am really growing to appreciate is something you touched on maybe 6 months ago on the podcast, like bring back boredom,
Hmm.
bring back
Hmm.
limited choice, bring back quiet, peace, calm. All of these things are very true to me. And I had not realized pre-pandemic how much running around I do in a week. And I love not doing that. And I really hope maybe we can talk about some things we hope will carry forward. I know you talked about your daily workout, for example. I want to hear about that and how that's going. But there are certain things that I will be sad about when we go back to normal. And 2 weeks ago, I did not feel like that about anything. How
Yeah.
about you? Does that make sense to you, by the way, or is that just completely crazy talk?
I feel like a lot of people are trying to reach through their headphones right now and strangle you, but I'm just kidding. Um,
I think it's a polarizing comment.
you're focusing on the positives, which is wonderful, and I commend you for it. My continued challenge is the every minute of the day feels like it's at max capacity until both the kids are down, and then there's still work remaining, but then there also is the need, truthfully the need, to finally have time for yourself or time with your partner, or time to check in with friends and family, and then you do a little bit of that, and then it's time to go to sleep and start it all up again the next day. And somebody asked me recently how it's going because they didn't have kids, and were checking in with me on that. And the word I used is it's unrelenting, and that is, and
That's
it's not a
true.
complaint. And I enjoy the time with the kids, but it is a long go, and there are no breaks. There are no pauses, which I think is the chief challenge, to sustain all this, to keep going. We have to find time to step out of it a little bit and take a break, and I think that continues to be the missing piece, the hard thing to achieve.
Everyone's having a different experience depending what stage they're at. So I think that the idea of no childcare and no outside help with kids, that is something that I'm not saying I hope continues.
Right.
That's not the bit that I think it's more just like it's very peaceful to just be like, there's nothing else I could do right now.
Yes.
It's like this freedom of choice that we have all the time that is actually provides a lot of mental load. The boredom and the simplicity I like. It's crystallizing, don't you find?
I think also in the business sense, no one's being stretched to run around the city to attend meetings or lunches, and there's a lot less opportunity to waste time, I think, um, because in the end, all that is throw on the phone, pick up your phone or throw on the video conference, and you're there. You do the business with the people you got to do business with, and then it's done. So there's a lot of, so to speak, fat that's cut from our days that otherwise would exist, and so maybe some of that will carry over, which would be nice. But I do think in the end, especially, um, when things are normal, and who knows when that will occur. Uh, the face to face, informal, you know, lunch meeting, that sort of stuff, I think does have great value, and there is a gap right now. And I would wonder how people who are looking to build their businesses or network can achieve that, because it's very hard to reach out to someone you don't really know and say, let's just pop on a video conference call for no reason to build relationship,
Right.
and maybe it'll go somewhere, you know? Yeah, so there's a downside, I would say, as well, obviously, in the business sense, on top of the very obvious downsides to a global pandemic in the personal and health and societal sense.
And what do you think about those coffees? Do you think that that's the kind of thing that people will miss and wanna bring back, or do you think that that will fundamentally
Yes,
shift? Do you think it'll come back?
I think that the value in those interactions, at least for me, is totally crystallized. Like, I have been on a few calls with clients and other people that are meant to be in informal times, which, you know, is great to do and advisable for, you know, team building and other purposes. But they're not a replacement at all for a coffee or a drink after work. They are awkward, they're choppy, they're people talking over each other. It is fundamentally, at least from my experience, not the same as, you know, sitting back. I'm kind of like now putting myself in that place and thinking, oh, that'd be so nice. Like sitting back in a, you know, in a pub and just having a chat about whatever for a period of time. Like that's a great experience. That's one of my favorite experiences, I think. And so that's why, you know, I don't think that anything virtual can really replace it.
Huh, interesting. I wonder if we are on that front kind of like the kids who don't talk on the phone, in like sort of the generational equivalent of like in my day we had coffees face to face, right?
But like to build a relationship, uh, I you just have to spend time together. Like you have to see how people are in, let's say, an unpredictable sort of environment. Like you get a sense for people that way when you're with them. You see how they talk to the server, you see how they talk to a friend they run into, or, you know, that sort of stuff. All that is totally lost right now. And as well, like, the studies show that, you know, a video conference call, you're actually like paying way more attention to yourself and the way you look and the way you appear, and you're actually having quote unquote eye contact with other people way more than you would normally have in person. And so you get more tired more easily, and there's a lot about that experience that is lesser than, you know, the in-person experience each other. I've been doing work with somebody who I have never met in person for the past like 2.5 months now. And I can't wait till I can actually spend time with her. And
Right.
see, and we just covered actually in our last call that we're both short people because we did not know that about each other, because you don't know these things, you know. I can't remember what came up, but she's like, I'm 5'1". I'm like, oh, I'm 5'6". The other thing I want to cover with you, Darlene, maybe this is something, maybe it's not, but you know, obviously as lawyers, we talk in risk calculation often. We're, you know, on a daily basis, at least. I feel like I help clients weigh risks and make decisions, and everybody has a differing risk tolerance. It'd be hard to really say that that, you know, one organization or one person has the exact same tolerance for risk. And now, as things open up, I mean, depending on where people live that are listening, but you know, restrictions are lifting across North America in some capacities, depending on the state or province that people are in. And I think that folks are now having to engage in a risk calculation conversation with themselves and their families, like one of the most important risk calculation conversations they've probably had ever, if not definitely recently. How do you think, you know, folks can weigh risk in this scenario? Is it the same as the way our clients do, or, you know, is there a process? Is it different? What are your thoughts on this?
Risk, my favorite subject. I'm so glad you asked. Oh, man.
My favorite board game.
Oh, yes. No, my least favorite board game. Way too long for my, attention span. I to be honest with you, I hadn't really put myself in the shoes of someone who doesn't usually calculate risk. It's a great question. I don't really know. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be going to, a bar right now. That wouldn't be worth the risk to me, but I guess it is to some people. I don't know. Risk calculus is something that's generally lawyerly, but it isn't. I mean, it's not really. It's a business thing. It's something that everyone encounters, and I don't know, how do you think they're doing it? Did you do an assessment of
It's
what you
I don't
think those
well,
people are
I had
doing?
an interesting experience in the early kind of few weeks of the lockdown. I was at um, there's a school near our house, and my daughter and I were just in walking through it, like the yard, and there was one of our neighbors lives, a number of houses away from us with her dog, and my daughter loves dogs, and my daughter asked if she could pet the dog, and I said, well, we have to keep our distance because of the sickness, which is what my daughter calls it, and so she didn't pet the dog, she didn't go near this woman, we continued on our way, and then like relatively not like days later, but within a week or so, 2 weeks later, our neighborhood has a group chat. That woman came on and said that she had COVID. She was diagnosed with her
Mm,
teenagers and the rest of her family, and so what would have like on paper been a pretty low risk, uh, activity, seemingly
right.
wasn't, you know, and that's I think why these standards are important to follow, because we can't, we are not in a position on in a calculated way to um, in an exposure to exposure uh, capacity calculate our risk. Maybe
Mhm.
there's situations where, like, I know in Newfoundland, you can double your bubble, is what they're saying, which is a cute way of saying you can join, the grandparents and the kids can join isolation bubbles. And what happens there is you obviously know if it's your parents or your in laws, like how those folks have been conducting themselves for the last few weeks. They know how you have been, and you can make a decision in that way, because you can get more rich data, so to speak, to make that risk calculation. But if it's just a rando, if it's somebody who you haven't had that conversation with and you can't necessarily trust as much, I think that taking the lowest risk approach, at least from my experience, is the best, because we otherwise could have been within the radius of this woman who potentially could have had the virus at that period in time, and and gone down that awful road.
One thing that I always do is whenever I take my kids to the city wading pool by our house, like the splash pad type of thing, I am that mom who's like right there with my kid, like right on top of them. And all the other cool moms are like at the edge and letting the lifeguard handle it and stuff. I'm like, I won't, because if anything ever happened, I would never be able to forgive myself. Right. And so to me, that's like one of those things where it's like, right now, it is more important to, be here than to be cool. So sometimes, like with the masks and stuff, there are a lot of those type of decisions. They seem like new decisions, but they're not really. It's like, does my kid wear a mask and risk us looking like the freaks of the neighborhood? Or do I, how do I feel if that was such a small thing to do and I didn't do it? So, I don't know. I think it's tough, and everyone's got to make their own personal decisions, right, at the end of the day. But I still say, like, I would follow the rules of, I'm not protesting in the streets about the lockdown. But I think even for people that are protesting, there's a lot of different situations right now that people are in. So I don't know about that one.
Yeah, well, we're all engaged in this risk exercise, which is fascinating. But for now, we will go to a break and come back with our goods and gripes. The Lawyer Life podcast is brought to you by Inter Alia Law. Inter Alia lawyers have big firm training, in-house experience, and a wide range of expertise in technology, media, and entertainment. Our advice is business-focused, speedy, and practical. To learn more, visit interalialaw.com. That's INTERALIA-law.com. And we are back with our goods and gripes. Goods are things we want to promote and support, and gripes are things that annoy us. Darlene, do you have anything to contribute to this segment of the podcast?
I have I would say a good. I'm reading a book called Untamed
Oh, yeah.
by Glennon Doyle.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a friend of mine dropped it off in my mailbox and was like, with a note, like required pandemic reading. And I was like, oh, okay, this is fun. And then as I started just sort of chatting with different people, a lot of people are reading this book. And it does talk about just getting really clear on what you know to be true and what, making sure that you're doing the right things. And for women in particular, it's quite an important book, I think, to read. Whatever your take on it, I think it's an important thought provoker. So I'm only halfway through, but it's been really good. And I think if a lot of people read it during this pandemic, there will be some change made in the future on a few points. So yeah, that's been really good. How about you for a good?
My good, I just owe a lot of my mental peace. Maybe that's not the word. I owe a lot of my days being reasonable to snow snap peas. This certain sort of vegetable product that my daughter loves. And it's great to give her as a snack or as a side at dinner. And she eats them and she gets good nutrition from them. And it's no bickering and it's simple and it's grab it from the bag, put it on the plate. And it's just little things like that right now. I just so appreciate. So wonderful vegetable product to nourish my daughter, which is extremely helpful in these times. Grapes? What do you got?
Grapes. Okay, I'll still, that I'm a fan of the of LinkedIn and social media for work. LinkedIn is probably my favorite social media for work. But I do find that it's so hard to just feel what I want to read right now about anything work related. That's the tough thing. I'm struggling with that. So when I go onto the news, it's sort of, you got to be selective about what you read. And then I'm even finding that just the emails that I'm getting that are mailing lists that I like, that I wanted to be on, I just don't have the bandwidth to be interested in a lot of things that I was interested in prior to the pandemic. Are you having that experience, or is that just me?
Well, I think at least in the way that I'm looking at stuff is my time is so limited to do the work I need to do. I like this kind of these secondary things that I used to engage with in my workday, just I have no time or interest in. On top of the fact that if they're like related to the epidemic or the pandemic, that I'm like, ugh. It's kind of like a double yuck. So
Right.
I have a similar experience in that way. Yeah.
Okay. It's probably generalizable then. But yes, that would be I guess it's a bit of a gripe.
Yeah.
And you?
My gripe is when you like your limbs falling asleep during your sleep. uh,
When
my
what's falling asleep?
when your limb, like
What
your
is
hand or your arm, is falling asleep because you're sleeping weird.
your limb? I don't hear the
Yeah,
word limb used so often that I
mhm,
immediately picked up on what you're talking about. My
yeah.
foot fell asleep in this podcast, actually. You may have
See,
heard me jumping around trying to fix it while we were on this podcast. Yeah. Gripe, definitely gripe worthy.
thanks for joining, Darlene. I hope your coffee is sufficiently drank. It's always nice to check in,
Oh,
uh, and we'll be back with another check in another week or two. Okay, talk soon.
okay. Thanks. Talk soon.
That's it for this week's episode of LLP. Thanks to Inter Alia Law for presenting the podcast and to Nick Fowler for composing and performing our music. See our show notes for his website. Don't forget, we love feedback. Please comment in the review section or subscribe or like. We'd appreciate it greatly. That's it. Talk soon.